Good evening. My name is Thurman Greco, and the name of this show is Let's Live with Thurman Greco. And it is coming to you on Woodstock, New York's own educational television, Channel 23, and on YouTube. And this show has been running now for over 15 years. It's been running actually almost 20 years, but the first few years that we did it, I lost some of the DVDs, but we do have, most of them are now on YouTube. And these are just shows about people in Woodstock. And we have all different kinds of people. And this evening, we have a very, very special guest. I have known you for how many years have we been sharing a space?
8 or 9.
8 or 9 years. Yeah. We've been in summers at the Mowers Meadow Flea Market. And he has a booth which has beautiful, beautiful things. And of course, things are so successful in your booth. And one of the things that I have had to learn is that in order to have a successful booth, you have to grow up in one. It has to be second or third generation, doesn't it? It really does. It really does. So, but then, as with everyone who has a flea market booth, there's another life which is completely different and very, very interesting and fascinating. So, I'm very happy to introduce you to, and will you tell us your name and tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'm Gary Beagle, and I've been doing John and Janine's Flea Market for probably 10, this is going on 10 years. I think I started there in 2013, but I've been doing flea markets all my life. I went to my very first flea market when I was 13 years old, and that was the old Maybrook Drive-In Flea Market down in Maybrook, New York, which was a great flea market because where it was situated, you had people from New Jersey and Connecticut and Pennsylvania and New York City and upstate New York, and it was just great stuff coming in. And that time I was buying antiques and collectibles at 13. And my dad did that too as a sideline from his regular career. And we did the flea markets together. And probably about 3 years after that, I met my friend Barbara. And she was my cousin Brian's girlfriend at the time, and she dealt in depression glass. And she was a big dealer in depression glass. And at that time, there were shows all over the country, Georgia, Texas, California, Ohio, and she would travel to all these shows. And I took an interest in depression glass, all the different colors and the manufacturers and the patterns, Art Deco patterns, Art Nouveau patterns, pastels, etched patterns. It was just probably hundreds of different patterns and probably 100 different glass companies in the 30s and 40s that were producing this glass. So I started picking and buying glass for her, and then about a year or two later I went out on my own. And that's what I did all through the 80s, late 70s, 80s, and into the 90s. I dealt in depression glass. Around that same time period, in the mid-70s, I met my good friends Marianne and Halsey that live right over here in West Hurley. And I met them down at the Maybrook Flea Market. And Marianne actually was the first one that got me to come up to Woodstock, and she took me around to all the shops and stuff in the 70s, which were a lot different than, what they are now. Not that the shops aren't great now, but they were totally different. And we would hang out and do Stormville and the different flea markets with Marianne. And in 1995, that was when it was a big change in my life. I was still dealing in the antiques, but my dad had a stroke. And it was a pretty serious stroke. It paralyzed him on the right side of his body. And my mom had passed 4 years prior to that. And I have no siblings. So his care fell to me. And I remember him being in the hospital, and he got very emotional. And he said to me, are you going to be able to take care of me? And I didn't know. I mean, I had never done, and I gave him the answer. I told him, I said, Dad, I do not know. But I made him a deal. I said, you do your therapy, get as much back as you can doing your physical therapy. And I said, I'll do the best I can. And we'll see how it goes. And it worked for 16 years through multiple smaller strokes he would have over the years. But I was his sole caregiver. I helped him in the morning get out of bed. I helped him get his breakfast, helped him shower, took him to doctor's appointments, everything that's entailed with being, a caregiver. But then in 2011, he got Guillain-Barré syndrome, which and I'm not even sure I'm going to describe it correctly because I'm not a medical doctor, but it affects your lower extremities. It starts there, works its way up the body, and paralyzes you. It affects your nerve endings. And some people it stops at the waist, other people it goes all the way up to your neck area. And unfortunately, with my dad, it went all the way up. And this was July of 2011 when he was in the hospital, and we spent two months, July to the beginning of September, in the hospital. And he was intubated, feeding tube. But I kept telling the doctors, no, he's going to get over this. I'm going to bring him home. I'm going to bring him home. And I had that mindset. It was probably the last week before we went into hospice. My cousin Cindy, who was a nurse, her and her husband Larry came to the hospital. And I remember coming into the room. My dad, like I said, was intubated. Cindy stood at the foot of his bed, just rubbing his leg, and I could tell she was getting very emotional, but was trying to hold it in, so I didn't, see how upset she got. And she said to me, Gary, let's go talk. So we went to a room off of the room that he was in, and her husband Larry and I, and I'm always grateful to Cindy for doing this for me. We sat and we talked for over an hour. And basically it was just me talking. They were doing most of the listening. But when we got done, she made me realize that this was something he could not get over due to the fact that he had the strokes, that he was 88 years old, and it was just something that was not within his grasp to conquer. And it was at that point that we ended up going into hospice. He went to the Kaplan Center down in Newburgh, to the Kaplan Hospice Facility. And I had some good counselors there. Angela, Sister Ann, she was a spiritual counselor at the hospice facility. And I had 4 cousins that actually came and stayed with me. Like I said, being an only sibling, they felt they needed to come and support me. So my cousin Jerry, my cousin Brenda from upstate came down, my cousin Mary Lou down in the city came up, and my cousin Nancy flew all the way in from California. Spent 2 weeks with me. And it was a big support, It was nice to know that family members care enough to, come and support you at a time like that. So the hospice doctor said, because it's a question you ask, how much time do you think he has? And they were pretty spot on. They said about a month, and he passed 1 day short of a month. Wow. In the hospice facility. But it's odd because, you talk to people that lose people in their lives, and everybody says that they look for signs, that their loved one's okay. And I got a lot of signs, and I've always gotten signs whenever a family member or a good friend's passed. All my life I've gotten signs, which we could do a whole program on that. But one of the very strange things, and my cousin Nancy, the one who flew in from California, she's a cynic. Best person in the world you'd ever want to meet, but she doesn't believe in signs. She doesn't believe in any of this stuff. And we were sitting in Kaplan, and my dad was still with us at that time, and I got up one morning, I went out into the big room, which was like the big community room, and Nancy was sitting on the sofa, and she was white as a sheet. And I went over and I said, what's wrong? And she said, I went down to the library. They had this community library where you could go read books or whatever. And I said, yeah. And she said, I got to the library door, and she said, I looked over to where the rocking chair was, and she said, I seen the image of my ex-mother-in-law sitting in the rocking chair, rocking and looking out the window. I don't know how many years prior her mother-in-law had passed, but she seen this image. And for Nancy to say something like that, like I'm saying, she was a cynic. But I got thinking about the hospice facility, what actually transpires, and all the passings that go on in the hospice facility. And it kind of makes sense that you would have these connections with people that have passed over in a facility like that. And one other sign, I had many of them, but the two that stood out for me were my two cousins. My cousin Mary Lou, the one that lived in Brooklyn, that came up and spent time with me. 2 days after she went home to Brooklyn, she would do flea markets too. She was into doing the flea markets. And in Brooklyn, she would sell stuff outside of her house. 2 days after the funeral, she went home and she was selling stuff outside of her house, and people would come and bring her stuff to buy. She said a man brought her a box of old sheet music. She bought them, but she didn't have time to go through the sheet music, so she set it aside. At the end of the day, she opened up the box of sheet music, and the top sheet music, which was a song from like the 1920s or 30s, the title of the song was "Wait for Me, Mary." My mom's name was Mary. I mean, how do you explain, people say, well, that's coincidence. It's not, but I mean, what are the chances that a sheet music would have my mom's name in it, and my dad passed 2 days prior? And so, and those things have an effect on you, Like I said, we could talk about signs and people passing over. We could do a whole show on that. But after he passed, I did go to grief therapy. Kaplan offered a year of free grief counseling. It was a group counseling. We'd go sit around a big table and just talk back and forth to the other people that had lost loved ones. And that helped a lot. But I was talking to my friend Charlene, because I had never done any artwork other than like 8th grade artwork in art class or whatever. My good friend Charlene, after my dad passed, we were sitting one day and she was trying to figure what I could do, to occupy my time and get me past losing my dad. And she was coming up with some things, and they weren't really anything I really wanted to do. And I knew her mom painted. Her mom, Joan, had painted for 20 years. She does oil paints. And I said to Charlene, do you think your mom would mind if I came to art with her one time? She said, no, I don't think so. So we asked Joan, Charlene's mother, and she said, sure. And all the artists that she painted with were really great. Joan gave me my very first paint box. The canvas board, she says, I'll give you some canvas board to work with. They gave me brushes, they gave me paints. A lot of the artists there, Jean and Rose, they did acrylics, they did some watercolor. My good friend Margie, who I met, was a watercolor teacher, and a lot of the stuff that I do at Mowers came from ideas talking to Marge, just throwing ideas back and forth, and she gave me a lot of the ideas that I actually come up with stuff that I do at Mowers. So I met all these great artists. I started to hang out at the Walkill River School, which is now called the Walkill River Center for the Arts. I met a lot of artists there. Sarah Pearson, who's the director there, she's been very nice to me. But I remember the first day I went to art. This is the very first painting I ever did. And Joan said to me, you probably want to do a landscape. I didn't want to do a landscape because I had all this emotion built up in me from just losing my dad a month prior. I had to get that out through the art. And the paintings, I didn't know what I was doing. I was just painting from whatever was inside. And from an artistic standpoint, they're not great, but from an emotional standpoint, this is what was coming out of me. And I would take them to the grief support, and we would discuss these paintings. And sometimes the discussions would go on for 20, 25, 30 minutes. And the other people that had lost family members, they would discuss the paintings. And actually Angela, who's one of my counselors, even came to some of my art classes, and I found out she painted, and she painted these really cool psychedelic looking horses and really cool paintings. So there was a lot of connections that were being made, with different people, and it helped me. But so the very first painting I painted, which as you can see is not a landscape, it's just a brick wall. And I said to Joan, I want to paint a brick wall. And the idea was leaving the sky come through is trying to break through the brick wall. And the hope and redemption is what I was searching for at that point after losing my dad. So this is the very first painting I ever painted on canvas board.
You know, this particular painting that you did is very strong, but it's also very important because of the times that all of us are enduring now. And I know that when I walked in this room, I was just really attracted to this. And I don't know whether, all I know is that it speaks to me. And it speaks to me because of what you were feeling when you painted it. But it also speaks to me because this is 2023, and everybody I know is in grief and is angry. And
in depression too, from being locked down for 4 years. And
yes, and you take anger, depression, anxiety, grief, you take all of these things, and this is what we've all got. This is just amazing. Well, now what about this one?
Okay, this was the second one that I did, and the idea on this was we start out in childhood with the schoolhouse, the schoolyard, and we end up at the cemetery. But I was looking at this one the other day when I got it out, and I actually, when you read a book, you read left to right, and when you look at a picture, you look left to right. I put the cemetery on the left, or on this side, when actuality, I think it should have been the other way around, but then I got thinking about it. I was leaving this, the cemetery, the caring for my dad, and looking for the new beginning, is the way I reinterpreted it 10 years after I painted it, which that didn't even dawn on me at the time when I was painting it. And I think that's why I actually put the cemetery on this side rather than the school here and the cemetery here.
I think it's just beautiful, and I love the play set. I love the swings and the teeter-totter. I think it's great. You do, now I'm going to digress here a little bit because I want people to know that this isn't the only art that you do.
No, I do the large piece signs, the smaller piece signs, ornaments, tile. This was when I first started going to Mowers, I was doing the antiques. And it was my friend Marianne and Halsey, who I had mentioned earlier after my dad passed. Marianne said, why don't you come up and do John's Market? And I was still doing the depression glass, and that's what I started doing, probably for the first 2 years. And then I started painting, and I started doing tile. And I was doing photographs at the same time. I was carrying a camera with me wherever I went. I'm not a good photographer, but I was documenting things. And there was a fair down by us, and I took this photograph of the merry-go-round, but there was a chain link fence with barbed wire at the top. So I took the photo through the chain link fence but left the barbed wire. And the idea of this is to get to the joy of the merry-go-round, sometimes you have to go through the barbed wire.
Now, are these for sale?
No, not the early ones.
Not the early ones.
Yeah. They're like my babies.
What is for sale? What is for sale?
This would be for sale because I could reprint another one of those. I don't know, there's some stuff that's for sale. The peace signs are for sale.
You do the peace signs?
Yeah.
Now, you have don't you have a display at the
Historical Society?
At the Historical
Yeah.
Society. Can we digress a little bit and talk about that now?
Yeah, what do you want to know? They came to me 3 or 4 years ago, asked me if I wanted to put some of my ornaments in there. And actually, I think Janine and Debbie actually had some of my ornaments on when you had them on in November or December. But I also do the Historical Society craft show in December. But they started a little gift shop at the Historical Society, and me and about 3 or 4 other vendors at the flea market. They asked if we'd like to put our stuff in, so I said sure. And
What have you got in there?
just the ornaments at this
Just
time.
the ornaments?
Yeah. It's only a very small area. I don't know if have you been to the Historical
No, I have not
Society?
been there.
The building is not that large. I guess
I've been to the
they're
building, but not since they got their gift shop.
Yeah, it's just as you go in that very small area. So they have,
It's a closet.
Yeah, basically. A little bit bigger, but
But that is a real compliment to you, because they have a very small space and you got in there.
yeah.
You know, that because there are a lot of people not going to get in there.
Well, at the time, Woodstock's been very good to me, and the people of Woodstock, whether they're the flea market people, the townspeople, some of the quote-unquote famous people that you see wandering through the flea market, the tourists, most of the tourists have been very nice. But I said to John Maurer one day, I said, I don't live in Woodstock. I've been coming to Woodstock since like I said, the 70s when Mary Ann first got me up here going to the different shops and stuff. But I said, I feel very blessed that the Historical Society wants my items. I said, but I'm not, quote unquote, a Woodstocker. And John said, you are a Woodstocker. He said, Woodstock is a state of mind. It's not these 4 square miles or whatever it is. He said, Woodstock's a state of mind. And actually, I've had other vendors that I've become friendly with, and my friend Olga, who does the pottery, who directly across from me, she said to me one day, Gary, you don't live in Woodstock? I said, no. She says, you seem to be more Woodstock than some of the Woodstockers. So,
Well, the thing is that you don't feel that you're a Woodstocker. And I've been here for several decades, and I don't feel like I'm a Woodstocker either. You're not a Woodstocker unless you're born here. So like the Maurers, he's a Woodstocker, but I'm not, you're not. But that's okay. We're part of the community. But I think it's very important before this show is over, for people to see some of the things that you do sell.
Oh, okay.
So that in the summer, when they come through, they'll recognize it.
Oh, okay.
And so...
Well, we were talking about when I started to do the art. So I was carrying my camera around, and one day I took a picture at the entrance of the flea market. There's John's sign, but I didn't like it as a regular photo, so I turned it into a negative image.
Oh my goodness.
So this is a negative image of John's flea market, and I did it onto tile.
So you can get tiles at your...
I was doing a lot of tile when I first started doing my art at John's.
Really?
John and Janine's flea market. I was selling a lot of tile, different art, different... And I work them up digitally and then transfer them to the tile. And they're not high-fired. It's not something, but it's artwork on tile. This is just a substrate that I use to, mount the images on.
Do you have special projects that you do in the winter to get ready for the next summer?
Oh yeah, I'm always working on something, or whether it's peace signs, whether it's paintings, because every day I'm doing something, trying to come up with a new idea, because I like to try to introduce something new each season. But my mind's always working. It's always coming up with new ideas.
How long has your father been gone?
2011. So it'll be 12 years in October. It was October of 2011 that he had passed away.
Do you feel that you have had some milestones since then?
As far as, I don't know, a lot of it's just going day to day, just taking each day as it is. There's days when I really still miss him. 11 years. You'd say, oh, aren't you over that yet? But that's one thing in grief support they taught me was, and they taught everybody else, is when you lose someone, you don't get over. There's no getting over. You get through the pain, you get through the sadness, and you go day to day. That's what it is, because, people will say to you, oh, aren't you over that yet? They died 2 years ago. They died 8 months ago. But they said at grief support, your life is going to be changed. And but you'll find a way to go on and find something to fill those voids. And when I was taking care of him in the 90s, my friend Linda had an antique shop, and I was still doing the antiques then, and I went into her antique shop and took a booth. It was a multi-dealer shop, and that helped me not just financially to get more money coming in, but also for a socialization aspect, because being the only person taking care of a loved one can be very isolating too, because your day revolves around that, taking care of the person, getting them up, getting to the doctor's appointments. So I needed that, and that really helped me to be in that antique shop at that time. And I find that with the people and the friends that I've met at Mowers too. The socialization is as important as the selling aspect to me. Just being there and meeting the friends. And I've told Janine this too, with their flea market. It's different than a lot of flea markets where we become a community on that field. I don't know if you feel that way or not, but you know, you meet the vendors around you, you become friends with them, you know, you exchange phone numbers, you exchange text messages. How's your week going? What are you working on this week? It's almost like a family, you know, a community family that John and Janine have developed out there. That's the way I feel about it anyway. So in that respect, you know, that has taken up a lot of the void of losing my dad.
Did you ever try to get a job?
Nope, I've done the antiques since, like, that was my job, doing the antiques all in the 70s, 80s, 90s. And I still dabble in that a little bit. I have an eBay site, and I put some of the artwork on. I still have a lot of depression glass, and I put that on, but you know, it's not as popular as it used to be, which is a shame because some of the patterns were artistic in their own right, you know. But no, I always wanted to do my own thing and be my own, the captain of my own ship, I guess you would call it.
Well, I think you definitely are here, you know. That's very true. You know, one of the things that I think about in the flea market is the fact that most of the people that I meet at the flea market grew up in a flea market somehow, somewhere. And their parents had a booth somewhere. Mm-hmm. I did not. The only access I ever had to a flea market was needing to raise money for a charitable purpose and going over there and asking if I could have a booth. And so many things happen, and I realize that I don't even speak flea market. I don't speak the language, really. But I'm there, you know. And I make mistakes from year to year, and then I sort of regroup, and then we try it again the next year, and John Maurer keeps letting me have a booth, you know, all the time. So I keep trying, and I look at him and I realize that none of us is young anymore. You know. Although
some of the newer, younger bohemian ones that are coming in, they're very cool people. And, you know, he's getting some new, younger blood coming in. But I told him, I said, your market's really changed in the last 10 years. When I first came in, it was more antiques and collectibles. Now it's becoming more of an artisan market with a lot of people coming in doing their own thing, whether it's pottery or, you know, painting, jewelry, which is a good thing, you know.
Yeah. Well, they had more jewelry, I think, several years ago. That's kind of given way to some other things. But, you know, it does change every year. I know my booth has changed dramatically, you know. And it just is what it is. But I think for each of us, it's its own therapy. I really do believe it is, you know. And for me, forgiveness is part of it. And I think that for a lot of people, I'm not going to say a lot. I'm going to say that for some of the people that I meet at the flea market, forgiveness is a factor. I do not know why, but for whatever I do. And in recovering with your father, I feel, and I have nothing to base this on, but I think that forgiveness is important. Is that when you went through grief therapy, did anybody talk about forgiveness?
We talked about guilt because there is that feeling. Could I have done more? Should I have done more? Did I do everything right? So there's a lot of guilt that goes through your mind when you take care of somebody that long. You know, did I do enough for him? Could I have done something more? Should I had intubated him, or should I just let him go? The shoulda, woulda, couldas. And there was a lot of discussion about that. You know. And you do, you have to, be kind enough to yourself to forgive all the things that you think you might have not done correctly. And just realize you did the best you could. And, for 16 years I did the best I could.
You cannot take care of someone else and do it 100% correctly. Nobody can.
Yeah.
You may have done something, many things, a thing, who knows, by the book, but if it didn't work for him, then it wasn't right.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that it was something that you should judge as a mistake. The woulda, coulda, shoulda stuff. That's very hard to get. I guess so. That's what you're saying, is when you forgive yourself.
Yeah.
That's tough. That's hard work. You went through that therapy for a year?
A little over a year, actually.
A little over a year.
It was one day a week, and like I said, we seen people come and go. Some people would come, do one session, and you would never see them again. Other ones would come, and probably 6-8 months, you'd still be there and forming friendships and connections with them. But there's one painting I want to, because these are all kind of dark, but I want to show you where the lightness finally came in. If I can find it here.
I didn't mean to take you away from your pictures. I just wanted to have some Oh, this is beautiful. Oh,
So these were very dark.
Yes. Well, this one I really.
And that was around the same time I did this one. For some reason, I had a circus fair type theme going, and it's the Ferris wheel on the cliff, and it's basically the same idea as
Look at that one.
this getting through. And they told me in grief therapy, they thought that the one isolated by itself represented me.
That was you.
And the Ferris wheel on the cliff is that, going over the cliff.
All those people.
And these three represented me and my parents, they thought.
Very interesting.
And I didn't even think of it that way, but that's the way some of the therapists
You just did it.
Yeah. But that was done around the same time as the photograph.
Well, I just see that as amazing.
Did they
It's
see that
amazing.
one? I'll hold that one up so they can see it.
Really, I do. Here, let me hold it up. I think the work is amazing. And then I also, this one was here.
Yes, now that, my friend Margie, who I said did the watercolors, she was one of my mentors along with Joan, who got me painting. Margie's a really good watercolorist. And this product that it's on is called Yupo paper.
Okay.
And I never heard of Yupo paper.
Me either.
And Margie had ordered this whole ream of Yupo paper, and she said, you know what, you're doing acrylics, but try to do acrylics on Yupo paper. Take a couple sheets of it and see what you can come up with. And this is what I came up with. This is acrylic on Yupo paper. And you have to seal it after you have to spray it because it rides up on it. What it is, it's like a polypropylene.
Now, is this something that you use still, or did you just do a couple of pieces of them and you
I've done some, but this was the very first one that I did. And that's where the lightness is starting to come into my work. Where the other paintings were kind of dark.
Very dark, yes. Yes, this one and this one in particular. Okay.
But, did you hold that one up?
Yeah. And
But like I say, Margie was the one who inspired a lot of the stuff, even stuff that I do at the flea market, but she's the one who turned me on to doing the Yupo paper stuff. So give it a try, see what you can come up with.
do you still take art classes?
I still paint with a lot of the painters. We go on Fridays. I actually was there today. This is what I did today, which I'll wait and show that one at the end.
Where do you go on Fridays?
I go to the Marasco Community Center in New Windsor, and then I also do stuff with the Wallkill River Center for the Arts in Montgomery, which they have a lot of wonderful, really world-class artists and teachers there at that school there. But yeah, I go on Fridays, and then on Tuesdays I go, and you learn. You pick up ideas. You're not trying to copy what they're doing, but you pick up ideas here and there, and
Right, and you paint with people, and you get to know their names, and you get to know what they're doing.
And usually I don't use a reference photo. None of these were from any reference photo. It's what's up here. I seen a Ferris wheel, kind of going to paint a Ferris wheel, or seen a whatever. I rarely use a reference photo for any of my paintings. So I did all these dark ones, and then all of a sudden, this came.
Wow. Now, where did this come from?
Just out of my head, I just
How
started.
long ago?
That was probably 6 months into the grief therapy.
Really?
Yeah. But I have a story that goes along with that one. Angela, who I mentioned was my grief counselor, and I told you she painted a few times with me. She loved this. So I made her a print. And her husband was stationed at West Point. He was in the military, and they ended up getting transferred to Tennessee. So she took this print that I had made for her, and she had it framed, and she put it in her office down in Tennessee. And we would talk a little bit, and she called me up one day, probably 3 years after I'd finished grief therapy. She was already down in Tennessee. And she calls me up on the phone, and she was very emotional. And I said, Angela, what's wrong? She said, nothing. She said, I was working with a little autistic boy today. And she says, I've tried everything to get him to verbalize, and I can't get him to verbalize. And she says, I've racked my brain. I've been trying everything I can think of. She said, I took the print of your painting down off the wall, and I went over to him, and I held it up, and I said, my friend Gary painted this. Isn't this pretty? And she said, the little boy looked at it, and he said, wow. And it was the first time he had verbalized anything.
Yes.
By looking at my painting. And she said it got her so emotional she just had to call me up. And
isn't that wonderful?
I guess that just shows the power of art, you know.
Well, you know, we are each and all wired differently. And you said it so beautifully today when you talked about how you can get inoculated against something, and then some people come down with a third disease or whatever. And it is the interaction of our DNA with the chemicals.
Yeah.
And we are each very, very different. And of course, when I first started trying to learn about DNA, most of it was considered junk. You know, scientists have now changed a lot. I mean, that was back in the 90s then. But I think we're at the beginning of this journey in which we learn things. And I think one of the important things that we're going to have to learn in the next 10 years is how to communicate with autistic people, because they are so intelligent.
Yeah.
And they have so much to contribute. And it is going to behoove society to say, we're going to do this. You know, it's like, we're going to go to the moon. We are going to do this, you know. And I think that there are some words that go into the next 10 years. And for you, one of them is grief. But I think also another one is gratitude. What are some words that your experience is going to bring you into the next decade? What are some words?
Well, I think gratitude's a good one, because after I got over, you know, the guilt phase, I realized I was lucky to have my father for those 16 years, because the doctor had told me that the type of stroke that he had, the normal lifespan for someone that has that type of stroke is about 7 years. And the doctor told me, he said, you kept him going for 16 years. So I was very grateful that, I don't know if I kept him going or it's his own will to keep going, but for whatever reason, I was lucky to have him for those 16 years.
Yeah.
So gratitude, and I think gratitude in general, you know, I'm grateful to have, like we just talked about, I'm grateful to have the friends that I've made at Mowers. I'm grateful to have all my artist friends. I'm grateful to have the support of a lot of my cousins. Even though I have no siblings, I have a number of cousins that I'm very close with. So family and community is something that's very important. Like you were saying, with the COVID and people being isolated in the last 4 years, it's caused a lot of the things we just talked about, the depression, the anxiety. So, just to have a community and a support system is really important.
Anxiety is such a big word now. When I talk to people, I'm sticking to this. I'm going to say a number and then I'm sticking with this. I think that half of the people that I come in contact with daily are dealing with anxiety. And the problem with anxiety is that it can grip you and it can take control. Anxiety can just totally run your life. And there are a lot of other words that are just as strong that cannot control your life. But anxiety is probably the one that just rips you apart. And I don't know, do you know anybody that's getting any treatment for anxiety?
No, but I think anxiety can lead to anger, and I think anger is a lot of reason we're seeing all these shootings and everything else that's going on in the world.
Right.
I'll give you an example. Driving up here through New Paltz, sitting at the red light in New Paltz, as you come through the center of New Paltz, where the red light is, and you make that little curve, head up this way, there was a man behind me. I got to where the gas station is. There's a car here, I'm here. And the car passed me and went almost up on the sidewalk to get around me because I wasn't going through the red light fast enough. Now, is that anxiety? Is that anger? That's just, did he have a bad day at work or what?
I think it's both. But something gripped somebody, something took a hold of that person. And you have been very fortunate to have these tools and to develop them. And so many people go through grief, go through the aging process, go through a healing process, and they, for whatever reason, do not connect to this at all. And it is so hard, I think, when you don't connect with anything, to come forward. And then, of course, you've been very fortunate, and I see this in several people. Hospice. You lived with your father for 16 years. Hospice now, I don't know what they do right now, but several years ago, hospice was saying, okay, we'll take you, but for 6 months. And so some people who are caregivers through hospice, the people don't die. They're cared for. And they are cared for in such a way that they are not going to die for a while. And I have a daughter who is a hospice nurse, and she talks about that, And I know several people now that are caring for people, and the people are not, not going to. So that caring for your father and for caring for some of these people becomes a satisfaction in itself. And when that happens, then you coexist much better and longer. But then when the person passes on, if you don't have some kind of therapy, it's a hike. It's hard.
And a lot of people, we talked at grief therapy about, there would be some people that would come in and, like I said, they'd do one session, that'd be it, they found it wasn't right for them. Or they would say, I thought I was stronger than that. I didn't think I would ever have to have therapy or do therapy. Like doing therapy is a bad thing. Oh, I should be stronger than that. I don't need therapy. I can weather anything. But the therapist there said a lot of times what happens in that case, they turn to alcohol, they turn to drugs, they turn to whatever as a coping mechanism rather than doing this or, talking it out with a grief counselor and trying to get through it.
Yeah. I think that's a very wise thing that you have just said. A lot of people, especially Americans, they like to say to themselves, oh, I'm strong, I can do this. I can do this. I am seeing it a lot now in this area, in this Hudson Valley area. An example of this is there's a lot of homelessness. And it is not just a little bit. This is a really bad situation that we have. And doesn't seem to be a way out for a lot of people. And people just, it's like somebody's got to just say, hey, we need to self-care. We need to, whatever it is you have to do.
Yeah.
Because if you don't self-care, you are going to do drugs.
Yeah.
You are going to do alcohol. You are going to do depression. You are going to do these other things.
Yeah.
And so one of your tickets to success, your coping mechanisms, was the grief counseling.
The grief counseling and then the art also.
Yeah.
And they kind of went hand in hand with each other.
Yes. And you're calm,
Yeah, I try to be.
No.
But my dad had that same temperament. He was very, even all my cousins said, your father was the most calmest person we ever knew. We just let things kind of go. Because, what are you going to do? You're going to get mad at everything, or, he was very calm. And I try to be, too. Sometimes we all have ups and downs in our personalities, but I think I tend to be towards the more mellow side.
Well, that's an important thing. So that's a coping skill that a lot of people, try to work on.
As long as you don't hold stuff inside of you either. You could walk around stone face and, stuff could be building up inside. As long as you let out in positive ways what's, bothering you.
Well, and I think one of the other reasons that we have in Ulster County is we have so many new residents in Ulster County. And at first, I used to say, well, it's so different from where they came from, and they've come up here because of the pandemic, and they're here because it's safer for them. But as soon as it begins to let up a little bit, they're all going to go back home. And I don't think that anymore. And the reason I don't think that anymore is in Woodstock, we don't have any sidewalks except on the main street. So we have all these people walking around on the roads. And of course, at this time of the year, it's dark at 4:30, so they're all walking around and they're wearing black. And I noticed that one lady had found herself some kind of a light thing that she tied onto her shoulder. And I thought, okay, you're going to succeed. You have learned a coping mechanism. So that's what you learn through the art and through the grief counseling, is the coping mechanism.
Well, were you here in 2001? Did you live in Woodstock in 2001?
I came a little bit later.
Okay, because I was wondering if around the time of 9/11, if there was an influx of people into town also after 9/11, because they said a lot of people wanted out of the city after 9/11.
Oh, yeah.
So I was wondering if Woodstock had a first wave of,
Yeah, they
new
did.
city transplants back then.
Yeah, we did have. I remember that. And we were in the Washington, D.C. metro area. And of course, the plane landed in the Pentagon.
Yeah.
And the people, I had a client, and she came to me one time and she was very upset, and she said, that plane landed in my husband's office. And I said, gee, I'm sorry. What are you going to do? I'm sorry to him. She said, no. She said that was personal. She said, if you knew what his job description was, she said they knew where he was. And she said if he hadn't gone down to the cafeteria for a cup of coffee, they would have gotten him. And I had several friends, acquaintances, and clients who, in their automobiles, They kept the gas tank full. They kept food for 3 days, and they kept a couple of changes of clothing, and they kept some cash. So that if they had to, they could go out and get in their car and leave and never come back if it returned. That's anxiety and that's fear. And of course, they began to leave the Washington, D.C. metro area like ants. You know, they would go out 3 hours away from Washington, D.C. and buy a house, because 3 hours away from Washington, D.C., you were in the countryside.
Yeah.
And that was that way they could still be there and still come back to buy groceries and go to the doctor or whatever. And that happened up here. They came north, east, you know, they came 3 hours.
Well, one of our, the antique shop that I told you that I was in, one of the dealers there, Tim, his wife Polly, worked in the city, in the World Trade Center. And for whatever reason, she didn't go into work that day. But she was on a conference call with one of her colleagues at work, and the colleague in the World Trade Center turned, looked out the window and said, "It looks like that plane is heading right towards," and the phone went dead. It hit right into the offices that she worked in, and you know, thank God but she never went back into the city, never went back to work, and they eventually ended up moving to Florida.
Yeah, she left town. So, you know, we've all moved around because of that. And of course, the pandemic, I don't know, that's part of our life now, I think. I don't know how you feel about that. You know?
Yeah. But it's something we have to adapt to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If we're going to be successful. It seems to me that you are well prepared.
Well, it's get up and do something each day, or lay in bed and pull the covers over your head. I mean, which option makes more sense?
Yeah. Well, getting up each day and doing something, for me,
Yeah.
makes more sense, you know, than pulling up the cover over your head. But nevertheless, there are a lot of different reasons for grief and recovery, and for overcoming fear and overcoming anxiety, you know. So look at this one.
Yeah, that was one of the early ones.
That was one of the early ones.
Yep.
That was one of the early, look at those lovely little hearts. Look at those hearts.
And again, it's the hearts trying to break through the wall of whatever wall was put up at that time. And the picket fence represents that proverbial house with the picket fence. And
Yeah.
it's,
Yeah. And then this is your new one.
this one I just did today, just to show that I don't always paint real dark. This took me like 3 hours today to do.
Wow.
I just said, well, I think I'll bring that one up since it's
What do you usually work, what is the medium that you prefer to work with?
usually acrylic.
Acrylic?
Yeah. And usually on canvas, I just had some canvas boards today, so I figured, I knew I had to come up here this afternoon, so I figured I'll just do a little one. And this took like 2-3 hours to do.
Well, now, these,
The
your
peace
peace
signs.
signs,
Yep.
you had a bunch of those last summer.
Yeah, that's one of my best sellers out to the market, actually.
Really? So you're still working on those?
Oh, yeah.
For the, can you bring that one up?
Yep.
I don't remember seeing the little ones.
Yeah, well, these are the guitar ones, and just...
That is just delightful. Are these at the Historical Society Museum?
no, they don't have room to...
Only the
Just
ornaments.
the ornaments.
Just the ornaments.
Yeah, like Janine and Debbie had showed you
Yeah.
back before Christmas.
So if somebody wants to get these, they go to the flea market.
Or they could go to I have some of them on my eBay website. Can I hold up my
Absolutely.
user ID? I have antique glass still in my eBay store, and I have paintings, and I have peace signs, but let's find where I did it. And while I'm doing that, if you want to hold this one up, this was an earlier one too.
Oh, wow.
And that one was just the concept of seeing the forest for the trees.
Oh, okay, there you go.
So my eBay store is Gary's Glass, Gary''S, Glass, Glass, or if you do a seller search, my eBay seller ID is GB58, and you can find my items searching either way, through the eBay stores or the just doing a straight seller search on eBay.
So how long have you had the eBay store?
1999.
Oh, so you've had it a long time.
Yeah. And that intersected the time that I was taking care of my dad. I was taking care of my dad and also trying to run my antique business all
All at the same
the
time.
same time.
That's tremendous.
But I would take my dad out to the flea markets. We would go to Stormville, I'd get the wheelchair, and like I say, the sense of community. I had a lot of flea market friends that would do Stormville, and they'd say, oh, leave your dad here. You can leave him at the booth, and I'd run around and buy, and he'd sit there. And he loves to, even though he couldn't do it physically himself, he still loved getting out and doing the markets, and I tried to accommodate and help him do that as best that I could for 16 years.
That's wonderful.
Because a lot of people that I knew, he knew also, so,
So he was out with his friends and acquaintances.
yeah, rather than just sitting in a chair watching TV, just
If you have some words of wisdom, a word of wisdom for someone who just now is beginning to become a caregiver, what could you say?
First, don't beat yourself up if you don't think you're doing the best you can, because you probably are doing the best you can. I lost a cousin back in June, and her daughter's going through the grief process right now. And she calls me quite often, and we talk, and she's going through the shoulda, coulda, wouldas, and I tell her, I said, you did the best you could for her. You're raising your own family, you're raising your own kids, you did the best that you could for your mom. And that's all anybody can really ask, is that you, as a caregiver, you do the best you can. And like you had said before, you're not always going to be perfect, everything's not always going to work right. But in life in general, sometimes everything doesn't work right or the way you think it's going to. But you just
Oh
have
my
to.
goodness, we're down to 3 minutes. Would you tell everybody again your name, how people can reach you, where they can find you at the flea market, all of those things?
Okay, my name's Gary Beagle, and I'm out to John and Janine's Market every Saturday, Sunday in the summertime, and I'm like the fourth booth down on the right-hand side as you come in. And if you want to find me on eBay, my eBay store is Gary's Glass, Gary'', make sure you do the apostrophe, S, Glass, or the easiest way is eBay seller search GB58. And I have my paintings, I have a lot of depression glass still in the store, the peace signs, and a number of other really cool stuff that you may like. So I appreciate any business that you want to toss my way.
And I think Gary is one of Woodstock's treasures. So you can also meet him on Saturdays at Janine.
Saturday and Sunday. Both
Yeah,
days.
Saturday. This year I'm going to do Saturday and Sunday.
Right.
Yes, I really am. I used to just do 1 day a week, but now I'm going to do 2. So I thank you again, and I thank Miss Ellen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alan.
Yes, we enjoyed it very much. And we look forward to seeing you next week and on YouTube. Thurman Greco. Thank you so much.